Good evening, everyone. Today is Wednesday, October 30th. Welcome to RhiNews, where we cover interesting stories that the news cycle seems to be missing out on. Joining me today, I have the author of Scientology A to Z New, an insider's guide to what Scientology is all about, Chris Shelton. Chris, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
All right. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a former Scientologist, and I like to think of myself now as a attempted critical thinker.
All right.
And writer. I wrote that book, and I write all my content that I put up online, and just somebody who's trying to get along in the world and maybe make it a slightly better place.
It's got an audiobook too. I might have to check that out next time I get an Audible credit.
Yeah, it's an ebook, audio, and softcover versions.
All right. Well, I look forward to reading that.
Cool.
All right. So speaking of Scientology, I hear Clearwater, Florida is getting taken over by the Church of Scientology.
Yeah, this is a real breakthrough story, actually. Tampa Bay Times reporter Tracy McManus did some real championship research on this, and there's a lot to know about the background of Scientology in Clearwater, Florida. But the news article basically is that the bombshell report was that recently, since 2017, Scientology has literally doubled its real estate portfolio in downtown Clearwater, and they already owned a sizable amount of the property. If you look at I'm sure we'll post the link to the story from Tampa Bay Times, they actually included an infographic that shows graphically with Google Earth how much of downtown Clearwater Scientology or Scientologists now own. And I don't know any other word to use except alarming. And the citizens of Clearwater have been up in arms about this since the news broke last week. And this is really only a Tampa Bay Times article. Churches purchasing real estate is apparently so common that this is not like the big news I think it should be. Apparently, for example, I found out recently that the Mormon Church owns more property in Florida than Scientology does.
Oh, wow.
How that makes any sense, I don't know. But specifically looking at the microcosm of Clearwater, Florida, which was up until Scientology moved in the mid-'70s, was basically a sleepy sort of, semi-tourist destination, semi-retirement community, and, all around nice place to go. But then Scientology moved in, and like I said, we can get into the background of that, but there are a lot of folks right now in Clearwater, history aside, who are wondering what this means for the future of the city itself. Because when you have any single entity, church or not, it's not the religious aspect of this that's the problem. It's the fact that there's a single entity which has already demonstrated that it is hostile to Clearwater's free will and enterprise, who now own half the city. At least half the downtown.
Yeah, it must give them some ridiculous political power in the area.
Well, it gives them a lot of clout in the area, and politically, they certainly have a lot of influence in the town. They've certainly thrown a lot of money around there over the years, and it appears we're sort of conjecturing here, but it appears that they have an eye toward taking over city government positions. And this has only just barely begun with the Clearwater Downtown Redevelopment Board. This is a formal body of the city, and 4 of the 6 members of this board are Scientologists. They have not yet run a Scientologist for city council, and I'm thinking that the exposure of this reporting probably has hampered their plans or delayed their plans in moving forward on that. But that's just conjecture on my part. But what is not conjecture is that they have I think it was about 2 years ago, David Miscavige went to each of the individual city council members and briefed them personally. And this was unheard of, that David Miscavige would go out and do something like this. He's the leader of Scientology now. Yeah. And he went out and briefed each one of them individually with graphics and blueprints and plans of the Church of Scientology's plans for a rejuvenated, renovated Clearwater. And they had a whole picture idea of the what the facades of the buildings should look like and how to revitalize the downtown area. And this was presented to the city, and the city said, well, thank you very much. I don't know that we're going to go with that plan. And they refused to sell Scientology an aquarium property that was up for sale that the church wanted because it was adjacent to one of their main properties. And because the city pulled the plug, Scientology was trying to outbid. They were going to pay 2 or 3 times more than what it was worth. And the city said, yeah, no, we're not going to sell that to you. And so since then, I believe part of this real estate acquisition has been a bit of a vindictive effort on the part of David Miscavige. He takes his time. He goes and briefs all these people, and then, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. And he says, oh, yeah, well, watch this.
Yes, he's being slow, and he's playing the long game.
Exactly. And Scientology has been playing the long game in Clearwater since the mid-'70s when they moved in. And the reporting on this is actually quite good because Tracy McManus walks you through that history and actually shows the docs that were acquired from the Church of Scientology when the FBI raided them in 1977. The Church of Scientology was raided because they had engaged in a covert intelligence operation against the United States government. And I use those words advisedly. It was an actual intelligence operation mounted by Scientology's own private intelligence organization. At the time, that was called the Guardian's Office. Now it's called the Office of Special Affairs. And yeah, and they only caught wind of this because one of the operatives had been careless in a library with a library copy machine at the IRS headquarters in D.C. and didn't have the right pass, shouldn't have been there. And they caught him out. And then, under, some interrogation, they found out that this was a much, much, much larger operation. And this included in Clearwater, Florida, a planning that encompassed basically taking over the town. So let's see if
how is an organization like this not like I understand there has to be a certain freedom of religion, but this is they're doing covert spy operations against the government of the United States. How are they still legal?
Well, this was a big problem, and 11 Scientologists, including L. Ron Hubbard's own wife, went to jail because of what the evidence gathered from that raid. There was a whole operation going on that was much, much larger than just the Clearwater operation. I'm only, talking about the Clearwater operation here because some of the planning for Clearwater was exposed. They called the overall operation that they were busted for from the FBI and that what people went to jail for was called Operations or Project Snow White, or the Snow White program. And the idea was to clear all of the files that the United States government had in all of its various agencies of any bad information about Scientology or L. Ron Hubbard. So they thought they'd go in, take the documents, and without the documents, there's no evidence, there's no proof, and so therefore, L. Ron Hubbard's a good guy, and Scientology's okay, right? This was the idea. This was actually the thinking.
So is that where they would go in and get rid of the time when he was documented as saying the best way to make money easily is with founding a religion or whatever?
Yeah, stuff like that, right? There were actually 3 separate instances where he said that. But yeah, stuff like that, and getting, and bringing this back to, because we could talk for hours about the Snow White operation alone, but the part of the documents that were revealed when they went in and when the FBI raided the LA and Clearwater headquarters, they found documents called Project Normandy. They had all these internal memos, hundreds of them, and one of them was this plan called Project Normandy. And if you remember, Normandy is, the beach that, in World War II. Well, Clearwater was their Normandy. They were landing in Clearwater, I believe, in 1975 is when they first moved in there. And they found this document that says The major purpose of this project is to obtain enough data on the Clearwater area to be able to determine what groups and individuals B1, which is the Guardian's office at the time, will need to penetrate and handle in order to establish area control.
Yeah, so
right?
they're
To
trying to
fully
take over.
Yeah, exactly. Major target to fully investigate the Clearwater city and county area so we can distinguish our friends from our enemies and handle as needed.
Wow.
Yeah, this is how Scientology words things when they're talking to other Scientologists, you see. This is internal. This was never meant
Yeah.
to be public.
Now, question.
Yeah.
I see you mentioning in the article, in your notes on the article, that they were buying up properties for sometimes 4 times their estimated value.
Yes.
How do I get the Church of Scientology interested in my house?
Yeah, move to Clearwater. Yeah, it's quite something. When they want something, there's no shortage of money, right? I'm a former Scientologist and I'm a former Sea Org member, so I was working at Scientology's highest levels for a number of years, and I went years without more than 2 shirts. We were uniformed when we were in the Sea Org. It's a paramilitary outfit, right? So they kind of like to model themselves after the United States Navy. So you have uniforms and ranks and ratings and yes sir, no sir, and all that. Yeah. And they take it very seriously. It's not a joke. It's not like the Salvation Army sort of quasi thing. Like they really take themselves seriously. So, but money is like impossible to get. I didn't have more than 2 uniform shirts for years at a time. 1 pair of pants until I wore them out. Shoes with the heels flopping about. They don't have any money for their own people, but they've got millions and millions of dollars to acquire real estate when they want it. So this tells you where their priorities are at.
Well, isn't that also part of the concept of control? Like if you control the person's income, you kind of control them.
Exactly.
It's like if you're on a boat out in the middle of the ocean and you have no resources, there's nothing you can do to fight back. You better play nice with the folks in charge.
Exactly. Have you ever heard of the bite model?
I have, yes. I had Telltale on my show a couple weeks ago.
I know talking about that.
Yeah, he goes. Well, I don't think we talked about the bite model, but I've watched enough of his channel that I'm passingly familiar with it.
Okay, cool. Then your listeners might be as well.
Yeah, I imagine I share a good chunk of my audience with Telltale. He runs a good channel.
Cool. Yeah. Well, that is in full effect with Scientology, right? The bite model. And for anybody not familiar, we're talking about BITE, behavior, information, thought, and emotion control. If you control those 4 elements, you basically control somebody about as thoroughly as you can, or a group of people. And Scientology is all about the bite model. It's fully established around that. And so behavior control, information control, they
took the bite model as a checklist of things to do.
Yes, exactly. pretty much exactly right. And so the other thing about this Clearwater thing that really was disappointing to me, being a Scientology critic and advocate against destructive cults in general. I'm not a one-man band on Scientology. I'm against all these groups, but I was disappointed to learn that the city leaders, the city manager, the city council members were absolutely blindsided by the news of all of these real estate acquisitions. None of them admitted to having any idea of the extent of the purchases. People have been warning the Clearwater City Council since 1980 about the dangers of Scientology, and they've gotten into various legal battles. I mean, the Church of Scientology actually tried to set up the mayor of Clearwater back in the day, back in the 70s. They literally engaged in an operation to make it look like he was guilty of hit and run, and they wanted to get him put away. Right? They wanted to get him removed as the mayor, so they set this whole thing up. And the mistake that people make, and that the city council has absolutely made, is none of them think that this is how Scientology still operates. They think Scientology has changed since how it operated in the 70s. And there is no evidence for why they should think that way, but they do. And it's difficult. I understand it's difficult to deal with a destructive cult like Scientology right smack in the middle of your town, but that's their job, So they shouldn't be. It's negligence on their part to be blindsided by finding out that any entity, whether it's a church, whether it's a politician, whether it's a game club, I don't care, to be blindsided by finding out that this entity has purchased half your downtown real estate. It's unacceptable, Yeah.
That's a little bit frightening.
Well, a little bit, and I hope I'll just put a little plug in here. I wasn't sure. Well, I'll just put this plug in here. There is one man who's running for city council who actually does get it, and his name is Mark Bunker. So anybody, who knows who has anything to do with Clearwater, please vote that guy in, because at least he'll be somebody who won't
vote for Bunker.
Yeah, exactly. I don't do a lot of endorsements on my channel, but in this particular case, this is an alarming news report.
Well, to move on to something a little bit less terrifying. Nuclear power.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Oh, yeah. The much safer alternative to Scientology.
Yes. Well, nuclear power, it turns out, is actually very, very safe. Now, I did want to touch on this story because last time I discussed nuclear fuel on the show, I was accused in the comments of fanboying over it and ignoring the massive, massive downside and how disastrous their accidents are and stuff like that. So I just wanted to bring it up again and point out that if you look at the data, yes, incidents like Chernobyl and Fukushima and things like that are complete disasters. They're tragedies, and they stick in our brains because it's one big event that kills a lot of people. But if you look at the actual numbers, and from the mining of the resources that you need to produce electricity, to the electrical power generation, to the downstream effects of the power generation, nuclear fuel, as we currently have it, is the safest form of electricity generation when you look at the death rates from energy production per terawatt hour. So that's per terawatt hour generated. Nuclear power kills 0.07 people.
0.07 people.
Yes. Whereas the worst is brown coal, which is 32.72 people per terawatt hour, followed by regular coal, which is 24.62, followed by oil, which is 18.43, and then it gets lower when you get to biomass and gas. The wind and solar is not on here. And this is nuclear fuel that we these are with the reactors that we currently have. These are this is the technology that we currently have access to. It is the safest form of power generation. Now, nuclear fuel does produce nuclear waste. And with the half-lives of the elements that are being produced, the waste needs to be stored safely for thousands of years. And we just really don't have the facility to do that. There's nowhere to put it. There's only so many mountains you can fill up with nuclear waste, and most of the nuclear waste that we produce right now are being stored in storage pools at the reactor itself, which is not supposed to be the case. It is supposed to be transported to long-term storage facilities.
Right.
And this is where Gen 4 reactors come in. They are still in the development stage. We don't actually have a working Gen 4 reactor yet. But when they do come online, they'll be able to burn the waste products from the older reactors and burn them down into elements that would only need to be safely stored for a few hundred years rather than a few thousand years. So it's still not ideal. There is still waste that needs to be stored for a long time, but it's an order of magnitude less time than it needs to be stored otherwise. So it's a great improvement. And
well, that's good. I've sort of had this sort of silly idea for a very long time about nuclear waste that I often joke about with people when we're just sitting around gabbing. But I always have felt that it's actually kind of legit as an idea. I know, especially with the amount of space tech that is now being developed. Why not just launch that stuff into the sun?
Because I think it costs more money to launch it into the sun than it does to just deal with the waste on Earth. It's just
Well, maybe.
future Rhino cutting in here. I just want to point out that I kind of missed the obvious when I was having my little chat with Chris. Turns out that rockets have an average failure rate of about 5%, and some of those failures will be high altitude explosions. And when you're talking about the amount of nuclear waste on the planet, they would need about 240 launches per year, which means 12 failed launches per year, approximately, with some of those failed launches being high altitude explosions. So radioactive rain doesn't sound like a good idea. I think so.
I thought this stuff was so hard and so expensive and so difficult and so impossible, and that's why it sits around in piles outside of nuclear reactors.
Yeah, but eventually it does. Well, that's what we're talking about with the Gen 4 reactors. Like, yeah, the current nuclear waste, that is a massive problem, and it stays there for thousands of years. But right now, we can potentially burn down the longest of the half-life elements, which are called minor actinides.
Mm-hmm.
And we can potentially burn them down into elements with shorter half-lives, so then it doesn't become as much of a problem.
Cool.
Now, there's actually been a recent study that they've demonstrated that they can purify the elements from the nuclear waste. Technically, it should be called used nuclear fuel, or UNF. So they can purify the elements from the UNF, and they can separate out the minor actinides from the other elements. And this alone, even if we never develop the Gen 4 reactors to burn the waste, this is a great improvement, because now we can store the minor actinides, which are the problem elements, in much smaller facilities, because they're really just a tiny percent of the actual waste. But it's just they have such long half-lives, and they get so hot while you're storing them that they're a small percent, but the fact that they're mixed in with the rest of it makes the whole thing a problem. So now that we can separate them out, you can store the regular waste in like a storage pool that doesn't necessarily need to last for thousands of years, and then move the minor actinides to smaller facilities that are easier to develop. So that's even if we never fully develop the Gen 4 reactors. But if we do develop the Gen 4 reactors, we can use them to burn the minor actinides out of the UNF and turn all of the waste into small, like shorter half-life waste. And so it makes sense to put the money into research and develop for the Gen 4 reactors just from a waste management perspective. So, like, even if we don't get electricity out of the deal, just the fact that we're taking care of the nuclear waste from the previous reactors, it makes it worth developing these Gen 4 reactors. But we do get electricity out of it, so it's kind of a win-win scenario. And the Gen 4 reactors could run for decades and potentially centuries just on the waste produced by the other reactors, like before we even need to open up new mines.
Right.
Because, like, let's face it, no matter what electricity generation you're looking at, mining is probably the worst part of it. It's the worst for the environment.
Absolutely.
Between nuclear, wind, and solar, let's just pretend that all of the environmental effects are equal, and nuclear produces waste. Aside from that, they're all equal. You still can't, like, with our current level of technology, we cannot provide all of our electricity needs with wind and solar. It's not possible. We don't have the grid storage necessary for that, because they are intermittent sources. So that, like, when the wind stops blowing, you need to have a battery there that it was charging up when it was blowing really, really hard.
Exactly.
The batteries just don't exist. There are methods being developed. Grid storage is it's going to be an important part of our future that needs more research and development. But until we can get grid storage to a point where solar and wind become viable for a larger percentage of the market share, we need something that we can just we need something that we can just use to create electricity when we need electricity. And right now, nuclear is the cleanest option for that and the safest.
Right. So that's been my understanding all this time as well.
So in the end, nuclear does sound scary, because, I mean, there are bombs that are nuclear and there's radiation and stuff.
Right.
But when you look at the numbers, the deaths per terawatt hour, it is the safest form of energy we have. And now that we're developing these Gen 4 reactors, we have a way of making its waste product much more manageable and potentially generating more electricity while eliminating the waste from the older reactors, all carbon free except for the actual construction of the nuclear plants. So no, nuclear is not perfect. No energy production method ever will be perfect. but it is mostly carbon free and it's available to us. And it is safer than any other form of electricity generation. And it's becoming much more feasible as we continue to develop the technology.
Cool.
Speaking of developing technology, what's this about SpaceX
Oh my
landing on
God.
the moon? And
Yeah. So SpaceX, man, Elon Musk. So yeah, the guy wants to land. He's got these plans to build. This is a two-part story, and I was absolutely fascinated by it. The first part is that he's got this idea about landing on the moon within 3 years, and they have this thing called Starship. It's with capital S, right? And they're going to build these things, and they're going to be like passenger and transport, cargo transport, launch vehicles that are going to be able to take people and things to the moon and beyond. And what the story here, there was a briefing from Gwen Shotwell. She's the COO at SpaceX.
can I just pause there? Can I just pause there for a second and revel in the fact that Shotwell is a great last name for someone that works in the space industry?
Yes.
Like, how'd that rocket get up there? Well, it was Shotwell.
That's right. Shotwell was responsible for that. Yeah. So yeah, they're developing this thing, and they want to get to where they are. Well, they've got ambitious plans in regards to satellites as well. But first off, they are raising a bunch of money for the Starship project, and Starlink is the satellite project. So they got these two things going, Starship and Starlink. And the idea with Starlink is to get a network of like 30,000 satellites up in space, providing high-speed internet to the entire world. And the Starship rockets could be used to get a bunch of them up there, as well as other, launch means that they have. And they've got this big timetable that they're pushing right now to get all this going very, very quickly. They're saying that they want to land on the moon before 2022 with cargo, and then get people going after that. Now, the thing is that they haven't launched, SpaceX has not launched one person into anything yet. No. The Dragon program, I forget the Dragon, whatever they were called, and the other launches that they've had, and they've had a number of them, and they've been successful, and they've been doing a good job so far, but they haven't put any people up yet, and that's their next plan, is to get a person up to the space station and then start going from there. The Starlink program, though, is something that I have much more attention on, and there are some potentially nefarious shindigs going on behind the scenes that I'll conjecture about after I give the facts here about this. But SpaceX, they've already started launching these satellites in order to get internet access to the world up there. They've got like 30 of them or something. They launched the first 60 Starlink satellites in May. They put them up on top of a Falcon 9 rocket and sent them up.
Yeah.
And Elon Musk is saying they have enough money to get the satellite network up to what he's calling an operational level. There's not a number of satellites assigned to that, what operational means, but operational is what he's saying. And they're going to launch another 60 and then another 60. And then what they want to do is they want to get going where they're launching 60 like every other week. Because what they're saying is these satellites they're meant to only be up there for a couple years, about 5 years, lifetime. It's a limited lifetime. That's what I was thinking of. And then they decay. They're meant to, because then they get replaced out every 5 years by another satellite that is the same, kind of modular sort of thing, but they can put new hardware and new software versions into what they're launching up there. And the Starlink setup, this is the moneymaker. See, the SpaceX program has not been a moneymaker, and the Starship program is not a moneymaker anywhere, anytime soon for the SpaceX company. And if you're, when you're talking about billions of dollars in order to do these launches, then you've got to get profit from somewhere. And so what they're looking at doing is using these satellites to get some money being made. Musk estimates that Starlink could generate more than $30 billion per year which is at least 10 times what SpaceX could bring in at best from its launch business. So, having these satellites up in this orbit, and we're talking 30,000 satellites. We're not even, I don't know if we're even going to touch how much junk is already up there.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I'm like, how much space junk is this going to create?
A lot. But, there's a lot more to this story, because while this is Elon Musk's program, guess who else is saying that he wants to also do pretty much this exact same thing?
Jeff Bezos.
Correct. And they've got a plan to get like 300 satellites up. Now, they have not even really begun. They're not anywhere near where, Musk's program is. But of course, they'll take everything Musk has learned and had to, figure out and move forward from that. So the idea of having competing satellite networks up in space surrounding our planet, this is an unregulated area. And this is where I'm going to start talking about my nefarious conjecture, because there's a couple things.
Because Amazon is well known for protecting its customers' privacy?
Exactly, right? None of these billionaires are known for protecting consumer rights or are consumer advocates. None of these people are. And I don't dislike Elon Musk as a person or as an individual. I think some of his planning and some of the work he's done has been absolutely amazing, stellar even.
Yeah, I have a lot of respect for Musk, but he also sometimes strikes me as the kind of guy that he just throws all the ideas on the wall and just sees what sticks.
Well, exactly.
He's had a lot of really bad ideas too.
Yes, exactly. But my problem with this is, if these are people who are in need of money in order to make SpaceX work, and I know Elon Musk is really, really hot to make SpaceX work. And I'm all for it. I actually am down with colonizing Mars, making humanity a dual planet species. I get it, and I'm actually fully on board with that. He appeals to my inner Trekkie, like very few other people in our world these days who have the actual influence and money and ability to do what he's doing. Nobody else is really talking like he is. And I like some of the things that he's saying when it comes to envisioning our future in space. But you got to pay for it. And it's a lot of money. And here's what I'm concerned about. If you've seen or heard anything about, government secret surveillance or corporate secret surveillance, because we're concerned about both now. We've got government overreach, we've got intelligence community overreach, and we've got corporate overreach. I mean, Google, Facebook, social media platforms, Cambridge Analytica. I mean, I just have to throw these words out, and anybody who knows what I'm talking about knows just how dangerous this actually is to our entire concept of individuality and privacy. So, if we're going to move forward as a society of free people, then we really need to be aware of what's going on, and knowing that warrantless wiretaps are still a thing, knowing that surveillance on a mass scale is not just a government operation, but is a private operation meant to influence political campaigns, as well as selling, baby food.
Let's not forget the accidental surveillance, where through bad programming they accidentally store recordings of people in and around their smart home devices. Like, just through programming errors, they were storing recordings.
Exactly. So I've got 3 of these things in my little apartment myself, because they're damn convenient. But it's also letting the surveillance system, surveillance state right into your home. These are questions that we really need to be asking ourselves about. And how this ties into the SpaceX program and the Starlink program is that if Elon Musk is looking for, capital to finance his SpaceX program for the future of mankind and all of that, the human species, the government has been found to be, and other corporations have been found to be, wonderful suppliers of millions and billions of dollars, if the tit for tat is that they get to use those satellites, let's say, to not only provide, free high-speed internet to the world, but to also spy on the entire world at the same time. Because if those satellites are what's providing the internet, then that means all the internet activity is going through those satellites. And that means everything that you're thinking, saying, doing on the net is going through those satellites.
Yeah, and then there's also the problem of it's hard enough to start a new internet company on the ground, but if you want to start a new internet company and compete with the satellites, you need to start with billions of dollars.
Well, exactly. And this is going to put, basically Amazon and SpaceX in charge of our internet privacy. So we have to ask ourselves, is that something we want? And does that open the door? Do we have any guarantees in the terms of service that we're all going to have to sign on to? Do we have any guarantees that they are going to actually protect the information that's going to be flowing through those satellites at a million gigahertz a second?
Yeah.
So I wanted to raise that as a point, because that was not part of any of the reporting about this Starlink program. And I had to go elsewhere to find, and I think we've got the link there, on how trillions are set to be made on surveillance communications from space. So you guys can check that story out. But I've got very, very huge privacy and security concerns with what Elon Musk is doing. And I'm pretty sure he's the kind of person who's thought these things through. But I don't know, the thing about these personalities, Jeff Bezos is somebody I absolutely positively do not and will not ever trust. Elon Musk, I've had a bit of a back and forth relationship. And, and it's we can't put the future of our species in this regard on, the trust of one person's moral compass.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So that's what I had to say about all that.
That actually ties in wonderfully with my next story, which is,
yes.
Do you know that Google watches you while you watch porn?
So I've learned.
Well, it's not quite as nefarious as that. They're not hacking your webcam. That's Facebook.
Right.
But so researchers they analyzed 22,484 pornographic websites, which that's a lot of websites, but that's what porn is estimated to be about a third of the internet. So it's not.
I was going to say, isn't it about a third of the internet?
Something like that. But they found that of the 22,000, close to 500 websites that they analyzed, 93% of them leak user data to third parties, and this really shouldn't surprise anyone, because the running joke anytime, I had a coworker when I was a teenager that he came and was like, "Oh, you're good with computers? Well, I think I got a virus." And my first response was to say, "Well, stop watching porn, ha ha ha," because we all know how untrustworthy the porn sites are. That's still a running joke today. The idea that these sites are seen as completely untrustworthy and are breaking our trust is kind of a mundane point. But what a lot of people might not realize is that even if you're using incognito mode, they still collect your browsing data while you're browsing in incognito. So incognito only stops your data from being collected on your own computer. But the internet is necessarily a two-way connection. It's your computer talking to someone else's computer, which then shows you your titties.
Right.
And then in another completely unshocking turn of events, Google trackers were one of the most prominent trackers on these porn sites. They were found on 74% of the sites that they analyzed. And
exactly. And that's a double-edged sword, is what that is. Because the reason that we can look up and know that 30% of the internet is porn is because of trackers like that.
Google tracks 100% of the internet. Well,
that's right.
Close to it.
But at the same time, you're kind of like, well, what else are you tracking? This is the problem with this, is the overreach is, they're doing some stuff. You're absolutely positive they're doing a few other things, but nobody's really sure about everything they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then also, in yet another completely unshocking twist, only 17% of the porn sites even bother to encrypt their data, which leaves 83% of them vulnerable to hacking.
Sure. They
So,
want to have maximum access to their sites.
yeah. So, yeah, like all this data is anonymous, but it can be used to kind of generate a profile of the person doing the browsing, and could potentially be used for targeted advertising, which
Mm-hmm.
could throw the stuff back onto your computer when you're done in incognito mode. Is
Getting
incognito mode
some.
doesn't hide your IP address, so they can tell it, like if you go to a site in incognito mode and then go back without incognito mode, it can, if they have one of these trackers on it, they can see that it's the same person unless you're using a VPN.
Right.
Um, so the moral of the story is don't trust porn sites, even in incognito mode, which seems kind of like that seems like it doesn't need to be saying need it. It sounds almost like it doesn't need to be said, but it sometimes does need to be said.
It needs to be said.
Yeah, a lot of people
Let's
like,
just be clear.
yeah, it's
Let's
like
be real.
even if you go
Yeah.
there and you know they're gonna do something sketchy, everybody's kind of mentally prepared for that. But it's like this is just another aspect to mentally prepare yourself for. And maybe consider using a virtual private network or a VPN, which
Mm-hmm.
will hide your IP address from not only your internet service provider but also the sites that you're going to.
Yep.
Speaking of
I
which,
do.
did I mention that NordVPN, one of the largest VPN providers, just had one of their servers hacked, and there was no personal data stolen, but the hackers did steal a server key, which remained active for several months after they stole it, which potentially allowed them to set up a fake VPN server that would enable them to steal any data from anyone that connected to them. Which
Yeah.
ultimately, it's not really a high risk scenario. Like in order to connect to them, you would have had to not use the software from Nord. You would have had to manually connect to their server yourself. But like if
Mm-hmm.
they somehow got your email address, sent you an email saying click this link to connect to your Nord VPN server, then they could have like an auto configuration thing going that would do it. Not like the easiest way to hack someone's data, but the point is even the VPN companies are subject to data breaches.
Right.
But
Yeah, there's no such thing as 100% security on the internet. That's for sure.
so at this point, our options are basically to live off the grid in one of those colonies of crazy people in the middle of the desert, or just come to terms with the fact that Google, Facebook, and Amazon already know everything about you, no matter how hard you try to stay private.
Yep.
So that's it for news stories today. Our history lesson of the day today is in 1938, on this day, Orson Welles gave his infamous broadcast of the War of the Worlds, which was reported to have spread panic across America. It didn't, but it was reported that it did by the papers, who might have been motivated by the fact that during the Great Depression, radio had taken a huge chunk of advertiser revenue away from the papers. So the papers wanted to demonstrate that they were the responsible, reliable source of news, and somewhat ironically, they did so in a way that started a massive myth that still persists 80 years later.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah, fun fact.
Wow. It's kind of like where does Christmas come from, or Santa Claus? Where does Santa Claus come from, right? There was not Santa Claus. It was one of these holiday guys was invented for the holiday. It was a marketing thing.
Well, I mean, Santa Claus was invented, like our current picture of Santa Claus was invented by Coca-Cola.
That must be what I was thinking of, because I've always had it associated with Santa Claus. Is this idea that these things are done to sell things? It's all about the money. When it all comes back to it, it's always about the money.
That's our lesson today. It's all about the money.
That's
Adpocalypse happened to the papers in the Great Depression. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun to talk about some news. I haven't done that in a while.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll leave a link to buy your book on Amazon down in the description. So go ahead and check that out.
Thanks for having me on, and I definitely look forward to doing this again.
All right. Thank you very much.